On my wedding day, my future husband deliberately ran off just to humiliate me in front of all our guests. He openly canceled our wedding because he was ashamed to have a future father-in-law who was a blue-collar landscaper. Seeing my father cry while hugging me and apologizing to everyone, my heart was completely shattered. But a few seconds later, a convoy of government vehicles pulled up in front of the community center. A decorated United States military officer stepped out, saluted my father, and then asked to marry me. The very next day, my ex-future husband's life was completely ruined. It turns out, before we get into the core of this story, for those of you who have subscribed and liked this channel, I pray that you remain healthy and are blessed with abundant fortune. Let me know in the comments which state you are watching from. I hope this video brings value and a lesson we can all share together. Watch the story until the very end. My name is Emily. Since childhood, my life was accompanied only by my father, who worked as a manual yard worker and landscaper. My mother passed away when I was still in elementary school. From that day on, my father took on two roles at once. He became the father who provided for us, as well as the mother who always made sure I never felt alone. Every morning before the sun came up, my father would head out to load his heavy equipment into his beat-up work truck. Sometimes he would only return when the sky was completely dark. His body was often soaked in sweat, his hands were full of calluses, and his back grew more hunched year after year. But strangely, I almost never heard my father complain. Every time I asked him to stop working so hard, he always smiled. He would say that as long as his legs were strong enough to push a mower, he would keep working. I only truly understood the reason behind all that hard work when I turned 24. One night when the power went out in our house, my father called me into his room. He pulled out an old, faded Folgers coffee can. The can was dull and full of scratches. For years, I had often seen it kept under his bed, but I never knew what was inside. With slightly trembling hands, my father took off the lid. Inside, neatly stacked, were several bundles of cash wrapped in plastic Ziploc bags. I immediately looked at my father in confusion. He just gave a small smile. He said all that money was the result of his savings over a dozen years. Little by little, $1, $5, $10. If he had a lot of clients, he set aside more. If business was slow, sometimes it was just loose change. I immediately cried. I knew how hard it was for my father to earn money. I knew how many times he came home bringing barely enough cash to buy us a decent meal. But it turned out that behind all that simplicity, my father was secretly preparing for my future. My father held my hand. He said he did not own a big house, did not own vast property, and did not own a sprawling farm. All he had was a little savings so that later, when I got married, I would not have to feel ashamed because he could not give me anything. I hugged my father as tightly as I could. Right then and there, I promised myself I would never let my father spend those savings. A few months later, Chase proposed to me. I was thrilled. I truly believed that Chase was a man who would accept me and my father just the way we were. When I told my father the news, his face immediately lit up. The next morning, without telling me, my father withdrew all the savings he had kept for so long. I was actually angry at first. I told him to let the money stay in the tin. I could still work. I could still save up myself. But my father just smiled while rubbing my head. He said he did not save the money to take it to his grave. He saved it so that one day he could see his child get married happily. If it was not used now, then when? I could not answer. I just cried while hugging him. Finally, we used all those savings to rent the local town community center for a simple wedding ceremony and reception. There were no luxurious decorations, no crystal chandeliers, no grand stages. All we had was help from our neighbors. The neighborhood women worked together to arrange the flowers. The local youth group hung the streamers and set up the altar. The homeowners association president even lent us extra folding chairs without asking for a dime. Seeing all that, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Because in that simple place, I could see so many people who were genuinely happy for us. I imagined that after the vows were done, I would hug my father. I wanted to thank him for all his sacrifices. I wanted to tell him that having a father like him was the greatest blessing in my life. Unfortunately, that happiness did not last long. When Chase first came to see the community center that had been decorated with such hard work, the smile on his face slowly vanished. His gaze scanned the entire room. Then he turned to me with a look I had never seen before. That look made my heart race uncontrollably. Chase did not say anything for a few seconds. He just stood there staring at the hall that the neighbors were decorating. His face was flat, but his eyes turned cold. I approached him with a smile. I asked softly what he thought. Instead of answering, Chase let out a long sigh. Then he asked with a disappointed tone if I was seriously going to get married in a place like this. I nodded and asked what the problem was. Chase gave a thin smile, but it felt like he was belittling me. He said many of his corporate friends were coming. There were business associates, his bosses, and even several important corporate clients. He could not believe he was getting married in a local community center. I tried to explain calmly. In my opinion, the venue was not the most important thing. The important thing was that we would legally become husband and wife. However, Chase shook his head. To him, first impressions were everything. He wanted everyone to see his wedding as a luxurious and classy high society party. I started to feel uncomfortable. All this time, Chase never discussed luxury. He always said that he loved me for who I was. That day, for the first time, I saw a side of him that was completely foreign. That afternoon, Chase came to our house with both of his parents. They sat in our living room with serious faces. Before my father could even offer them a drink, Chase's mother opened the conversation. She said their family had discussed it. According to them, the wedding should be moved to a luxury hotel ballroom downtown. I instantly fell silent. My father also looked confused. With a soft voice, my father said that all his savings had been spent to book the community center and prepare everything needed for the ceremony. Hearing that, Chase's mother actually let out a small laugh. She said that if we did not have the funds, why force our daughter to get married now? Those words pierced my heart. I squeezed my father's hand, which had started to tremble. My father still tried to smile. He said that this was the best we could do. Even if it was simple, he hoped it would still bring blessings. However, Chase instead said that he did not want to be a laughingstock to his friends. He said he had imagined walking into a high-end ballroom with magnificent decorations, beautiful lighting, and sharply dressed guests, not walking down the aisle in a cheap recreation hall. I started to feel deeply disappointed. I asked softly if all this time he loved me or his prestige. He did not answer. The one who answered was his father. He said a man must protect his dignity, and according to him, Chase's dignity would plummet if he married in a simple place. I almost cried hearing it. My father bowed his head for a long time. Then suddenly he stood up. With a faint voice, my father said that if money was the issue, maybe his work truck and landscaping equipment could be sold. That statement made me jump to my feet. I held my father's arm as tightly as I could. I screamed no. I truly could not bear to hear those words come out of his mouth. That truck was not just a vehicle. It was our entire livelihood. If he sold his truck, how would he make a living after I got married? I begged my father to drop the idea. I even said it would be better for this wedding to be canceled than for my father to lose his only source of income. The house fell dead silent. Chase just watched all of it without making the slightest attempt to comfort my father. A few moments later, he stood up. He said he would think everything over one more time. After that, they went home. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Chase's words. I began to ask myself if he really loved me all this time, or if he only loved the life he imagined with me. 2 days passed without any news. I tried to contact him countless times, but my messages were only read and never replied to. Until finally, exactly 3 days before the wedding, Chase came over alone. The moment he stepped into the house, he immediately apologized. He said all this time he cared too much about what people said. He admitted he had come to his senses. According to him, luxury was just an accessory. The most important thing was building a life with the woman he loved. I stared at him for a long time. For some reason, There was still a bit of doubt in my heart. However, Chase held both my hands. He promised he would come to the community center and marry me regardless of anything. My father, hearing those words, smiled in relief. I slowly began to erase all my bad prejudices. I believed maybe Chase just had a lapse in judgment. I did not know that behind his smile and apology that afternoon, Chase had actually prepared something far more painful than just rejecting the venue. The day we had been waiting for finally arrived. I woke up even before the morning church bells rang. For some reason, since I opened my eyes, my heart was beating faster than usual. I tried to brush it off as bridal jitters. After I finished getting ready, I headed to the community center with several neighbors. Once we arrived, the atmosphere was already bustling. The women were busy arranging the catering. Children were running around the yard. The men were greeting guests who were starting to arrive. Everyone seemed genuinely happy. I caught a glimpse of my father standing in the corner of the room, looking at the simple altar that had been decorated. Every now and then he would smooth out a tablecloth or adjust a guest chair that was actually already perfectly placed. I knew my father was just hiding his nervousness. I walked up to him. I said softly that today, his daughter was finally getting married. My father smiled. His eyes started to tear up. He just nodded and rubbed my head like when I was a little girl. He said that today he was already incredibly happy. Those words almost made me cry. Not long after, the bridesmaids started walking me to the front. All the guests were seated. The pastor had also arrived. We were just waiting for Chase to enter the room. I kept looking toward the entrance. However, the figure I was waiting for never appeared. At first, I was not too worried. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe he was just running late. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes, then 15 minutes. The atmosphere began to change. Some guests started looking at each other. The pastor checked his watch several times. I tried calling Chase. My phone rang for a long time. No answer. I tried again. Still no answer. My chest started to feel tight. I tried to keep smiling so my father would not get anxious. But I could see him starting to pace near the entrance. Occasionally, he asked a relative standing outside if Chase's car was in sight. The answer was always the same. Not yet. Time kept ticking. It had been 30 minutes since the ceremony was supposed to begin. Whispers began to echo from various corners of the room. Some guessed Chase got into an accident. Some said maybe he had a flat tire. Others tried to calm my father by saying he would surely arrive any minute. I kept clutching my phone. Not a single text from Chase. No news, no explanation. Just a growing sense of dread. Then, from outside, the sound of several cars pulling up could be heard. All the guests immediately turned to look. I stood up as well. My heart raced again. I thought Chase had finally arrived for the ceremony. A few seconds later, Chase actually walked into the center. He was wearing an incredibly sharp tailored suit. His hair was perfectly styled. Behind him walked his father and mother, followed by several other family members. Strangely, not a single one of them looked to be in a hurry. There were no guilty faces, no apologies. Instead, they walked casually, occasionally smiling at each other. I immediately stepped down from the altar. I approached Chase. With relief, I said softly, "Thank goodness you came. I thought something happened." However, Chase did not return my smile. He just stared at me expressionless. Then he stepped right past me toward the front of the room. He asked the DJ for the microphone. All the guests instantly fell silent. I was still standing a few steps behind him. I started getting a very bad feeling. With a loud voice, Chase asked all the guests to listen carefully. The first sentence that came out of his mouth instantly froze my body. He announced that there would be no wedding today. The room went dead silent. I even felt my breathing stop for a moment. Chase continued his speech without even glancing in my direction. He said he came on purpose just to announce that the wedding was canceled. Not because he changed his mind today, but because he had planned it all along from the very beginning. I immediately shook my head. I could not believe what I was hearing. With a trembling voice, I asked why he was doing this. Chase turned to me. Then, in front of everyone present, He said with a tone full of disgust that it was because he refused to have a dirt-poor landscaper for a father-in-law. That sentence echoed throughout the entire room. Not a single person made a sound. Everyone just looked at each other with shocked faces. I felt my entire body go weak. Not because my wedding was canceled, but because I knew the person most hurt right then was not me, but my father. And when I turned to look at him, I saw my father's face slowly turn pale. It was as if all the strength in his body suddenly vanished. I ran over to my father before he completely lost his balance. His face was pale, his gaze was blank, and his hands were shaking violently. I grabbed both his arms while continuously calling out to him. My father looked at me slowly. Then, without saying a word, he hugged me incredibly tight. That hug was different. It was not a comforting hug, but the hug of a father who was blaming himself. I could feel his body shaking. A few seconds later, my father burst into tears. He cried on my shoulder. In my entire life, I had probably only seen my father cry twice. The first time was when my mother died, and the second was that day. With a stuttering voice, my father said, "Forgive me, sweetie. Forgive me. If only I had wealth. If only I wasn't just a yard worker. You wouldn't be treated like this." My tears instantly fell. I shook my head over and over. I told him he had not done anything wrong. The one at fault was not him. The ones at fault were the people who judged human beings by their bank accounts. However, my father kept crying. He slowly let go of the hug. Then, something I absolutely never imagined happened. My father walked to the center of the room. In front of all the guests filling the hall, he bowed his head. With a faint voice that could barely be heard, my father said, "I am so sorry. I made all of you come from so far away, but the event ends like this. I am truly sorry." The atmosphere became deafeningly quiet. I saw some guests bowing their heads because they could not bear it. However, not everyone did. From the corner of the room, someone was heard whispering, "That's why you should know your place. A lawn boy shouldn't dream too high." Soon after, other voices started popping up. "Pity the girl, she's pretty, but her dad's just a dirt shoveler. No wonder she got dumped." If I were Chase, I'd be embarrassed too. Every sentence felt like a knife piercing my chest. I wanted to defend my father. I wanted to scream, but my voice seemed to have vanished. The most painful thing was my father's face. He was not angry. He did not argue. He just kept his head bowed, as if he deserved all those insults. On the other side, Chase's mother actually smiled with satisfaction. She took a step closer to my father with a tone deliberately raised so all the guests could hear. She said he should have realized from the start that her son was not meant for a family like ours. If we did not have money, we should not dream of having a son-in-law from a respected family. Chase stood next to his mother. He did absolutely nothing to stop those words. In fact, his face looked proud. I stared at Chase. The man I had believed would be the leader of my life now stood before me like a total stranger. There was not a shred of guilt on his face, only pure arrogance. I gripped my wedding dress tightly. I was no longer crying. All that was left was an incredibly deep sense of disappointment. Right at that moment, the sound of sirens could be heard from a distance. At first it was faint, then it grew closer. Everyone automatically turned toward the outside of the hall. The sound of several vehicles stopping happened almost simultaneously. Not long after, a convoy of dark government SUVs and military vehicles pulled into the parking lot. The atmosphere that was initially full of mockery suddenly turned into pure confusion. Some guests stood up from their chairs. Children ran to the doors to see what was happening. Even Chase and his family looked at each other. They seemed just as confused as I was. The door of the lead vehicle slowly opened. A solidly built man stepped out wearing a full United States Army dress uniform covered in medals and ribbons. His stride was calm, his gaze looking straight ahead. Everyone spontaneously cleared a path. No one dared to block his way. I assumed he was here because of some important official business in our town. But my assumption was wrong. The officer did not even look at Chase, nor at the guests. He kept walking past the altar, past the pastor, past everyone, until finally, he stopped right in front of my father. My father, who had been keeping his head down all this time, slowly lifted his face. He looked confused. Before he could utter a single word, the uniformed man stood at attention, raised his right hand, and rendered a crisp, full salute to a blue-collar worker in front of all the guests. Instantly, the community center went dead silent. Not a single person dared to make a sound. All eyes were locked on the military officer. His hand remained in the saluting position. Meanwhile, my father just stood frozen with a face full of absolute confusion. A few seconds later, the man slowly lowered his hand. His eyes began to well up with tears. Then, with a heavy voice holding back deep emotion, he said, "Sir, I have finally found you." That sentence made all the guests look at each other. I myself did not understand what was happening. My father furrowed his brow. He stared at the man's face for a long time, but ultimately just shook his head slowly. He apologized and asked if they had ever met. The man gave a small smile. He said it was completely understandable if my father did not remember him. Because for my father, what he did back then might have just been a small act of help, but for him, that day was the day that changed his entire life. He then introduced himself. His name was Captain Liam. He currently served as a commanding officer in an elite army unit. However, years ago, he was just a young ROTC cadet undergoing rigorous training. All the guests started listening intently. Liam took a deep breath. Then he began to tell his story. Over a decade ago, the vehicle he was riding in suffered a terrible accident while he was on a training exercise. His body was badly injured, and blood was pouring from his head. The people who saw it just stood by the side of the highway. Some were too afraid to help, others just watched. That was when a local landscaper hit the brakes on his work truck without asking who the victim was. Without caring about the uniform he wore, the man immediately lifted Liam's bloody body into the cab of his truck and floored the gas pedal, rushing him to the nearest hospital emergency room. Upon arriving at the hospital, the worker realized the money in his pocket wasn't enough. Without a second thought, he pulled out his entire earnings from that week. Money that was supposed to be used to buy groceries was handed over to the front desk to cover the emergency admission deposit, so Liam's life could be saved. After the doctors took over, the man simply left. He did not leave a name, did not ask for an address, and did not even stick around to accept a thank you. Liam looked at my father with eyes brimming with tears. He said that since waking up in the hospital, he only had one clue. Everyone told him that the person who saved him was a local yard worker who drove an old beat-up truck. No one knew his name. No one knew where he lived. From that moment on, Liam promised himself, if he ever managed to find that man one day, he would repay his kindness. For years he searched. He asked for help from numerous people. He visited hardware stores and landscaping lots all over the county. However, the results were always zero. Until a few days ago, one of his enlisted men who was stationed nearby accidentally saw a wedding invitation flyer pinned to the bulletin board at the local community center. Written on it was my father's name. When the soldier mentioned it to Liam, he immediately drove down to verify it. As soon as he saw my father's face today, he was certain the man he had been searching for all this time was finally standing right in front of him. My father's tears slowly fell. He let out a soft sigh and gave a humble smile. He said he finally remembered. He did indeed help a wounded young cadet once, but after that, he never thought about it again. According to my father, anyone would have done the exact same thing. Liam immediately shook his head. No, sir. Not everyone is willing to sacrifice their last dollar to help a total stranger. If you had chosen to drive away that day, I probably wouldn't be standing here right now. Those words made several guests bow their heads in shame. The people who just minutes ago had mocked my father now only looked at each other with embarrassed faces. Liam then stepped closer. With the utmost respect, he took both of my father's hands. Sir, for years I searched for you with only one goal in mind. I wanted to repay my debt. Today I arrived, but what I saw instead was you being humiliated in front of so many people. Liam's voice began to tremble. He turned to look at me, then back to my father. With a profoundly sincere tone, he said, "If you will permit me, let me be the one to protect your daughter. Allow me to become your son-in-law." That sentence made the entire room feel as if time had stopped. I covered my mouth with both hands. I genuinely could not believe what I had just heard. My father also looked stunned. He shook his head slowly a few times. He told Liam not to joke around with a poor man like him. Liam immediately replied, "I never joke about honor, sir. I didn't come here out of pity. I came because I believe that the daughter of a man with a heart as big as yours is a woman worthy of my respect for the rest of my life." Before my father could answer, suddenly the sound of laughter erupted from the back. And the person laughing the loudest was Chase. Chase's laughter echoed throughout the hall. He even clapped his hands as if he had just witnessed a hilarious comedy show. Everyone turned to look at him. With a mocking smile, Chase said, "Well, Captain, are you actually being serious, or are you just feeling sorry for the girl I just threw away?" I bit my lip. I was not angry because I was insulted. What hurt me was how Chase constantly belittled the sincerity of others. Liam was not provoked in the slightest. His face remained calm. He just stared at Chase without changing his expression at all. Chase laughed again. He said if the captain really wanted to repay a debt, he should just hand over some cash. Buy him a house, buy him a truck. Why on earth would you want to marry a woman that I clearly just dumped? A few of Chase's family members smirked as well. They felt Chase was winning the room. However, Liam remained silent. A few seconds later, he finally spoke. Softly, but every word rang loud and clear. "I am not picking up trash that was thrown away. I am honoring a woman who has never been ashamed of having a father as decent as hers." That statement instantly made several guests nod in quiet agreement. Chase started to lose his smile. However, he still tried to look confident. He said that Emily would never be happy living with a soldier. According to him, my life would only be full of strict rules and constant deployments. I did not respond. I preferred to look at my father. I saw his eyes watering again. Not out of sadness, but out of immense pride and emotion. Liam then took a few steps toward Chase. The distance between them was now only a few feet. The room went silent again. With a perfectly level voice, Liam said, "Starting tomorrow, your life will never be the same again." All the guests immediately exchanged nervous glances. Chase actually laughed harder. He shook his head with a cynical grin. "Are you threatening me, Captain? If so, you've got the wrong guy. My family has deep connections with state politicians. We have very important people backing us. I'm not scared. In fact, if you try anything funny, I guarantee you're the one who's going to be in trouble." Liam just stared at him for a moment. There was no rage on his face, no wild threats. He simply said two short words. "We'll see." Those two words sounded simple, but somehow they made the atmosphere unbearably tense. Chase scoffed. To him, the warning was just a bluff. He then signaled his family to leave. Before stepping out the door, Chase's mother still managed to look back at me. With a condescending smirk, she said, "When you finally wake up to reality, don't come looking for my son again." I did not answer. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt I no longer needed to prove anything to them. As soon as Chase's family left the community center, the atmosphere slowly calmed down. I turned to look at Liam. Honestly, my mind was still spinning with confusion. Everything that happened that day felt so fast. I had not even fully processed the fact that my wedding was ruined. And now there was a man I barely knew asking for permission to marry me. Liam seemed to understand exactly how I felt. He did not pressure me for an answer. Instead, he said that the decision was entirely in my hands. If I refused, he would still deeply respect my father and consider his life debt unpaid. I looked into his eyes. There was not a trace of arrogance in them. There was no pity. All I saw was pure sincerity. I then asked for permission to speak privately with my father. We walked over to the side of the hall. My father held my hand very tightly. He said that whatever decision I made, he would always support it. I asked softly, "Dad, if I accept his proposal, are you okay with it?" My father smiled. He said the only thing he had ever wanted was to see me spend my life with a man who respected our family, not a man who only loved us when things were convenient. My father's words made all my doubts slowly fade away. I took a deep breath, and then we walked back into the main room. All the guests immediately looked at me. Liam stood calmly. I walked up to him with a voice that was still shaking. I asked if his intentions were truly genuine. If he was truly ready to accept my father as family, then I accepted his proposal. The entire community center was instantly filled with tears of joy. Several of the neighborhood women started crying openly. Meanwhile, my father covered his face with both hands, no longer able to hide his happy tears. However, no one realized that at that very moment, the wheels of fate for Chase had already begun to spin in a direction he could never have imagined. After I accepted Liam's proposal, the atmosphere that was initially filled with sorrow slowly turned deeply moving. The pastor, who had been a silent witness to everything that transpired, approached us. He asked gently, "Are we absolutely sure we want to proceed with the vows today?" Liam looked at me for a moment. Then he said he did not want to make a decision based on fleeting emotions. He just wanted to confirm one thing, that I was accepting him willingly, not because I felt I had no other options. I nodded slowly. I answered honestly. From the very beginning, all I ever wanted was a man who respected my father. And today, only Liam managed to show that respect in front of everyone. Liam smiled. He then asked the pastor for a moment to call his family. Not long after, several more cars pulled into the community center lot. This time, it was Liam's parents and his younger sister who stepped out. As soon as they saw my father, they rushed over. To my surprise, Liam's father reached out his hand first. He introduced himself warmly. Then, without a hint of awkwardness, he pulled my father into a massive hug. He said that for years he had heard stories about the man who saved his son's life. Today, they were finally united. My father looked very awkward. He kept repeating that he was just a regular yard worker. However, Liam's mother immediately grabbed my father's hands. She said that a person's job never determines their worth. What makes a person honorable is their heart. I saw my father look down again. He was fighting back tears once more. Shortly after, Liam's family asked the pastor to proceed with the ceremony right then and there. All the necessary paperwork was quickly sorted out. The townspeople eagerly pitched in to help. There were no more gloomy faces, only beautiful prayers and cheers from the guests. I sat back in the simple bridal prep area. This time, not waiting for Chase, but waiting for the man who arrived bringing absolute honor to my father. A few minutes later, the pastor called us forward. I stood at the altar that had been prepared. My heart raced again, but differently than before. Now the fear had transformed into a profound sense of peace. I heard Liam recite his vows loud and clear. His words were sharp, decisive, and without a single ounce of hesitation. The pastor smiled warmly. He pronounced us legally husband and wife. Cheers and applause filled the hall. I covered my face, weeping. Not out of sadness, but because I never expected God to replace such deep pain with a happiness I had never even dreamed of. My father walked up to me. He held both my hands with puffy eyes. He said, "Starting today, I am no longer afraid of leaving this world, because there is already a good man who will take care of you." I hugged my father tightly. That day, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Not because I married an army captain, but because finally, someone appreciated all of my father's sacrifices. The reception carried on. The food that had been prepared since early morning was finally enjoyed together. The neighbors who had been crying earlier were now smiling in relief. Many approached my father to apologize for ever believing the words of Chase's family. My father simply replied with a smile. He said there was nothing to regret. What happened has happened. Let it be a lesson. By late afternoon, Liam and I said our goodbyes to all the guests. Before leaving the community center, Liam walked up to my father again. He shook my father's hand with deep respect and said, "Starting today, you are not losing a daughter, you just gained a son." My father couldn't speak. He just nodded while wiping away his tears. I thought after all of that, the storm had passed. I thought our story had finally reached its happy ending, but it turned out that what Liam said to Chase the day before was starting to become a reality. Early the next morning, massive news rocked the city, and Chase's family name became the talk of the town everywhere. That morning, I was helping my father water the plants in the front yard when Liam's phone kept buzzing. Several messages came in almost simultaneously. Liam just skimmed them and put his phone back in his pocket. I saw his face remain completely calm. I was curious. I asked softly, "What's wrong?" Liam looked at me with a faint smile and said that the news he had mentioned last night had finally come true. Shortly after, the television in the living room broadcast a breaking news report that left me speechless. A prominent state politician had been arrested by federal agents for a massive corruption and embezzlement ring that the authorities had been quietly investigating for a long time. Simultaneously, several corporations that had been securing illegal municipal contracts through back-channel deals were raided. One of them was Chase's family's real estate development firm. Within hours, all the company's bank accounts were frozen, all construction projects were halted, and their offices were taped off by the FBI. The news spread like wildfire. The people who used to bend over backwards to get close to Chase's family slowly vanished. No one answered their phone calls anymore. No one wanted to be seen on their side. I finally understood what Liam meant at the community center. It wasn't a threat, nor was it personal revenge. The federal investigation had been going on long before my wedding day. As a ranking officer with high-level clearances, Liam simply knew that the legal hammer was about to drop. Later that afternoon, someone knocked on our door. When I opened it, I saw Chase standing there alone. His appearance was drastically different. The dress shirt he wore was wrinkled, his face was pale, his eyes were swollen as if he hadn't slept all night. As soon as he saw me, he immediately looked down. With a quiet voice, he said, "Emily, I am so sorry. I truly regret everything." I didn't answer. I just motioned for him to sit on the porch. A few seconds later, Chase spoke again. He said his family's business was completely shut down. All their associates had abandoned them. Even the friends who used to constantly praise him had disappeared one by one. He admitted he just realized that all this time he had been way too arrogant. He judged people by their wealth and status. But in reality, all of that could vanish in the blink of an eye. Chase then looked at me. His tears started to fall. He said if he could turn back time, he would have never left me. He was willing to start over from scratch, as long as I was willing to give him another chance. I took a deep breath. For some reason, I didn't feel angry anymore. All that was left was pity for someone who realized his mistakes much too late. I said softly, "If you had married me that day, none of this would have changed who you really are inside. You only learned how to respect others after you lost everything you were so proud of." Chase just sat there in silence. A few moments later, my father stepped out of the house. Chase immediately stood up. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees in front of my father. He begged for forgiveness while crying his eyes out. He said he had deeply wounded the most genuine person he had ever met. My father asked him to stand up. He didn't yell at Chase, nor did he bring up all the insults we had endured. My father simply said, "Son, there is no job in this world that makes a man worthless. What makes a man worthless is when he believes he is superior to everyone else." That sentence made Chase cry even harder. He shook my father's hand one last time before finally turning around and leaving our driveway. That was the very last time I ever saw him. The following days went by so peacefully. My father no longer drove his landscaping truck or pushed heavy mowers. Not because he was ashamed, but because Liam and I agreed to insist that he finally enjoy his retirement. Every morning, my father now spent his time sitting on the front porch, sipping hot coffee. Sometimes he would joke around with the neighborhood kids playing out front. The smile that had been gone for so long finally returned to his face. Meanwhile, Liam never changed one bit. Every time he came home from his deployment or base duties, the first thing he did was walk up to my father, shake his hand with respect, and ask if he had eaten a good meal that day. Seeing the two of them talk just like a real father and son always made my heart feel so warm. I often think back to the day Chase humiliated us at the community center. At that moment, I thought my life was over. I thought my father's lack of wealth was the reason I lost my chance at happiness. It turns out, I was wrong. It was precisely because of my father's pure heart that God brought me together with a man who respected our family without caring about money or status. Now, I truly believe that good deeds might not always be rewarded instantly. Sometimes, they take a very long road. But when the time is right, the reward arrives in a way we could never have even imagined. And every time I look at my father smiling and enjoying his twilight years, I know that all the tears we shed in that community hall that day were finally paid off with a far more beautiful happiness.